Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Kerr. It's the time of this recording. The 75th Primetime Emmy Awards finally took place on Martin Luther King Day a couple days ago. They were originally scheduled for September of last year, but got delayed due to the SAG strike. Jack Mahanes is here to join me in recapping them. So, Jack, are you ready to begin?
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here as always.
Well, first, why don't we talk about the show itself? What were your thoughts on the telecast as a whole?
I thought it was interesting that they sort of brought back the old seating arrangement like
Right.
they did before the pandemic hit, or they did it at the Nokia. It was just the big auditorium because they did it virtually in 2020 where everyone was at home and everyone and like the lead acting winners and the series winners were brought the trophies in a hazmat suit by people in a hazmat suit, and then next year they did it with people sitting at tables, and they did the same thing the next year. So it's interesting that they returned to that old setting. I thought Anthony Anderson was overall a good host. I think compared to some of the hosts we've seen at award shows this month, Joe Coy was a disaster at the Globes. Chelsea Handler was good from parts I saw because I didn't watch Critics' Choice live. I thought Anthony Anderson did a pretty good job. Not, I wasn't like blown away by what he did, but I thought he did a good job overall.
Yeah, I too really enjoyed Anthony Anderson as host. And another thing I thought the Emmys did better than the Golden Globes did was ceremony moved at such a great pace, especially when it came to the award presentations, which I mentioned this on Twitter, but award shows in general, well, this is referring to the Golden Globes, they seriously need to cut the banter between presenters and get on with the awards.
Yes, I think it did a really, really good job. Everything flowed at a very fast pace that at one point I kind of was like, okay, where are we in the ceremony? It was like, oh wow, like we only have like less than 30 minutes left in just a few categories. Wow, that went by fast. So I think that was good.
Something I also thought the producers did a great job of was highlighting 75 years of Emmy history with all these onstage reunions of classic TV shows.
Yes, thought that a lot of those were cool. I think probably my favorite one was the It's Always Sunny reunion. Now, that's a show like I've only seen like bits and pieces of, but like my mom and my little brother are like huge fans of that show. And so they were really, really excited to see all of them up on stage together. And yeah, Danny DeVito gave a shout out to his now separated from wife.
Right, because of course Rhea Perlman was on the telecast earlier, reuniting with some of her Cheers co-stars, John Ratzenberger, Ted Danson, George Wendt, and Kelsey Grammer.
Yeah, but where was Woody Harrelson? I think it would have been cool if he was able to find the time to be part of that reunion.
In fact, I must admit, now I've never seen an episode of The Sopranos, but I will say during the reunion between Michael Imperioli and Lorraine Bracco, I wondered where Edie Falco was.
Yes, that's a mystery.
I guess let's now discuss some of the winners. Okay, starting with the limited series categories, most of them were dominated by beef.
And I think everyone knew going into the ceremony that it was going to be a big night for beef. It did very well at the Creative Arts. We knew that the two leads were heavily favored to win. It was interesting that, while some fields either did a clean sweep or a near sweep, they spread the wealth in the supporting categories, which showed that, they're at least somewhat watching other shows. Kevin Jacobson, I always love it when we get to like maybe like a few awards and only like two or three shows are winning things. And it's like, voters this year, we only said this. We only watched three shows.
Well, that's what a number of people on Twitter were complaining about.
Yeah, and I just feel like, Beef, I think, pretty much had this in the bag ever since the nominations came out, and it performed the way it did.
Yeah, what was interesting is that when the Prediction Center launched, Evan Peters was originally the frontrunner for Outstanding Lead Actor in a limited series TV movie for Monster Dahmer, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. I mean, he won the Golden Globe, and he did not win the SAG. And, you and I were texting shortly after nominations were announced that you were settling on Stephen Yeun early on because of potential pull for beef, as well as the fact that Evan Peters not only lost the SAG, but he lost it to Sam Elliott, who was from the previous Emmy cycle and wasn't even nominated there. So, yeah, you gave me an idea for a great piece for Gold Derby about how, if Peters couldn't win the SAG, which is a very popular stories group, especially up against someone who was eligible at the last Emmy cycle and wasn't nominated, then yeah, wow, it's hard to see how it could possibly do better with the Emmys.
That was what really, really showed how weak he was in that race. Or I should say, not weak, because there was obviously some chance of him winning. But I just think that that should have been a very, very easy win for him. And the fact that he lost to Sam Elliott of all people showed how he was vulnerable to be overtaken by someone else. The SAG win should have been a very easy win for him, given the competition, and the fact that he lost that showed that he was very vulnerable to be overtaken by someone else, especially by someone who had a more recent release advantage. And sometimes that helps. Sometimes your show kind of being, towards the end of the Emmy deadline cutoff date, that can help. Given that voting was back in August, I think that definitely helped, the beef actors, especially Stephen Yeun, overtake Evan Peters.
Yes, I agree. I guess we should probably mention now. Now, usually there's at least one big surprise at the Emmys every year. This year, there were like none.
No, there were no surprises at all. That was the one thing that nothing was really exciting, except for maybe a few that I was rooting for. But aside from that, it was just like, oh, that was predictable. That was predictable. I just wanted a surprise or two, and I just don't
Yeah.
feel like we really got any surprises.
Yeah, which, makes me wonder, had the SAG strike not happened, which caused the Emmys to get postponed, and if they took place in September as previously scheduled, would any of these have been considered surprises at that point?
I think the only one that would have been considered a surprise was The Bear sweeping the way it did. When we first saw the nominations come out, we saw that Ted Lasso broke its record for how many nominations it received, because last time it got 20. This time it got 21. And so people thought, okay, they're going to give it a farewell hug. They're going to want to give it, some love one more time, even if they went with Jeremy Allen White for comedy lead actor. But I actually never bought that. I actually had The Bear pretty much the whole time, but I did not have The Bear sweeping. But I just never bought that they were going to give Ted comedy series and not give Ted Lasso himself a third Emmy. I just never bought that. And Jeremy Allen White was just such a slam dunk to win his category that I was just like, yeah, it's going to take series 2.
Well, yeah, I sort of wrote a similar article for Gold Derby about that, how it just would seem weird if, Ted Lasso wins comedy series, but Jason Sudeikis doesn't win, or vice versa with The Bear. But yeah, it was, again, also a big night for The Bear as well. What's especially interesting is that IU just won Golden Globes and Critics' Choice as a lead actress for season 2. Yeah, here for season 1, she was in supporting. So yeah, I guess that can probably make things a little confusing for those who aren't keeping track.
Exactly. And I gotta say one thing about that moment. I was cracking up and even was still thinking about it the next day, how Christina Applegate, who presented that category and was the first award of the night, how she opened the envelope and she said, and the Emmy goes to, I'll get your ass up here. Because we have to realize this is probably going to be Christina Applegate's last major public appearance, given that she's sick with MS. The Dead to Me is finished. She said that she's pretty much done with on-screen acting and she's going to focus now on voice acting, just so that she can still make money to support her family, especially since she's a mother. But I also was wondering, based on the way they were kind of having it set up, which, I mean, obviously we don't know whose names are going to be in the envelope. I mean, no one knows except for the people who do the tallies.
Yeah, the accounting firm people.
Yes, exactly. But just the way they were setting it up, where she introduced Carol Burnett, I kind of wondered, like, are they trying to set up this tearjerker moment if by some Hail Mary, Christina Applegate ended up winning in a pretty open category? And I did wonder, like, is she about to win? I didn't predict her, but I did wonder if she was about to win, but then Quinta Brunson won. I just was like, oh, that was obvious. And I think with Quinta's win, it was more than anything, one, the category was kind of lined up fairly well for her. And two, it really was kind of an IOU from last year, because she was definitely the one that came in second behind Jean Smart. And I think with Jean Smart not there and her competition not being that strong, I don't mean in terms of the quality of performances, but I mean in terms of how strong the shows were as Emmy contenders, I think that it kind of lined up very perfectly for Quinta in the end.
I'll admit, I didn't make my predictions for Outstanding Lead Actress in a comedy series until the last minute, and there was a case to be made for, any of the nominees to win, but I decided to play it safe by going with who a majority of people were predicting, Quinta Brunson in Abbott Elementary, who just became the first African American in 40 plus years to win win that category.
Yes, and you could tell that she was very emotional when winning it. I think she said that getting it from Carol Burnett was probably what made her the most emotional about that moment. And it was just very interesting how, the Bears swept, but then Abbott still got that one win.
In a category where the Bear wasn't even nominated in.
But yeah, kind of assessing, the rest of that field, it really kind of seemed very unlikely that Rachel Brosnahan was going to win a bookend Emmy when the buzz for Maisel kind of really died off as the show went on. And it just seemed unlikely that she was just going to come back and finally win again when like almost no one was talking about Maisel anymore. Natasha Lyonne, I don't know if Poker Face really made that much noise as a whole. I don't know how many people actually got around to seeing Poker Face. And then for Jenna Ortega, I went on a limb and predicted her, but looking back, I think really the only tea leaf we had as to who had the edge was Golden Globes, maybe, because Quinta and Jenna actually competed against each other there, and Quinta won. So looking back, I probably should have thought that, Quinta was probably going to pull it out in the end. I just wanted to take a risk. And so I just was like, look, Jenna Ortega's this is, rising big star. She was in a series that a lot of people really enjoyed, got into comedy series. We even got a directing nomination. Now, I know that doesn't have any correlation because it's just actors voting, but it did make me wonder if she had a chance to surprise.
From having listened to Next Best Pictures podcast predictions, someone mentions that, if Ortega couldn't win the Globe, albeit a year earlier, then they just had a hard time seeing how she could possibly fare better with the Emmys.
And looking back, that definitely makes a lot of sense.
And, it was also nice that, when Quinta went on to present an award later on the night with Marla Gibbs from the Jeffersons.
And I got to point out something. So, yeah, that went to Niecy Nash-Betts for Dahmer, which I know that race was kind of seen as a toss-up between her and Claire Danes, but I went with Nash-Betts because Claire Danes has won a few Emmys, and I kind of thought that maybe this time they would see that maybe it was Niecy Nash-Betts' time, and maybe she was due for TV Academy recognition. And also just, that performance was really buzzed about when Dahmer came out, probably even more so than Evan Peters. So that's what made me settle on her in the end. But I got to point out this. Niecy Nash-Betts, back at the Golden Globes, presented Quinta Brunson with her Golden Globe. At the Emmys, Quinta Brunson returned the favor and presented Niecy Nash-Betts with her Emmy.
Oh, man. That's probably the first parallel example like that I've ever heard before.
Yep. It was something that kind of clicked not too long after it happened.
Now on to the drama categories. It was a big night for the final season of Succession, winning in every single category it was nominated in, except one.
Yes, and I think everyone knew for the longest time that drama supporting actress was Jennifer Coolidge's to lose. And I know, obviously, having, multiple co-stars in the category, there's always a question of, do they knock each other out? But really, I think with the exception maybe Aubrey Plaza getting maybe a respectable amount of votes, there's no way that any other three were going to cut into Jennifer Coolidge's vote tally that much. And even then, the alternatives were not very strong in terms of at least their performances or their show. I mean, Elizabeth Debicki was fantastic in season 5 of The Crown, but even The Crown really underperformed. It seemed unlikely she was going to win it this year, although given how the winter precursors have gone for season 6, she may be more in luck next year. And then Rhea Seehorn, it just seemed, unlikely that she could win. And then J. Smith Cameron, I know some people were predicting whether she get on a sweep. She's good on the show, but I think, people who watch that show, even they know that's not a win-worthy performance. She's good. The nomination is, fine, but she is like one of the weaker members of the main cast in terms of the quality of the performance. So it just seemed very, very unlikely that they were going to go James McCameron. So really, I think that this was a pretty easy one to call for Jennifer Coolidge. And I think that Jennifer Coolidge was even more deserving this year than her Emmy for the first season of The White Lotus.
Yes, and not to mention vote splitting clearly wasn't a factor in supporting actor nor lead actor, as, Matthew Macfadyen and Kieran Culkin both prevailed up against co-stars for their respective performances in Succession.
Yes, but it's drama supporting actor. It was 4 from Succession, 4 from The White Lotus.
Right, so there was pretty much no one was canceling each other out there.
Nope, especially given how Succession ended, it definitely made sense why Matthew Macfadyen was going to win one more time. And then I'll say, as far as the lead acting categories, that was the main thing I was really hoping for on Emmy night. I really wanted to see both Kieran Culkin and Sarah Snook win for the final season of Succession. Not only because it was their last chance to be awarded for playing those characters, but also season 4 was both of their best seasons. And I remember saying on this podcast that, when I told you that Julia Garner was absolutely going to win one more time for the final season of Ozark, I know predictions were kind of slightly all over the place with that one, but I was very confident Julia Garner was going to win it one more time. Both times she won against Sarah Snook, that was well deserved. Now with Sarah Snook going lead and not having to compete against Julia Garner, I thought that this was the right time to finally get her that Emmy.
In fact, let me remind you that when we were discussing Oscar predictions almost a year ago, you brought up a reason as to why Cate Blanchett was vulnerable to win Best Actress for Tar, because we've seen how the Emmys tend to hate chilly characters, which was why, according to you at the time, thought Sarah Snook was probably never gonna win for Succession.
Look who's smiling now, that I'm glad that I was wrong. But I will also say this. When we recorded that, it seemed at the time that she was going to stay in supporting, where Jennifer Coolidge just had a giant lead at the time. But then the best decision that she and Kieran Culkin could have made was going lead. And even if that was still a factor for Sarah Snook, I'll say her character became way more empathetic in those last couple of seasons. But I also think because her competition was not very strong in lead, she was able to overcome that. And because, a lot of those were like shows that were not going to be high priority for viewers. A couple of them, it was the only nomination for the show. It just seemed very, very clear that whatever concerns you might have had about like unlikable characters or chilly characters, as you said, have a hard time winning, if at all. It was clear that given who she was up against, that she was going to overcome that.
Of course, it was also funny because I believe a lot of us predicted Kieran Culkin would win supporting last year, but was upset by his co-star Matthew McFadyen. So hey,
I think that was because last year McFadyen had a greater character arc for season 3. I think that that's why he was the one who ended up being the supporting actor win for Succession and not Kieran Culkin. And now I think this year for Kieran Culkin, Jeremy Strong's been rewarded before, and there really didn't seem like there was really an incentive to give it to him again. And then Brian Cox is only in 2.5 episodes of the final season. For those listening to the podcast who have not seen Succession, I'm not going to say why.
So is there any other highlights from the night you want to bring up?
One win that really pleased me was Paul Walter Hauser winning for limited supporting actor for Blackbird.
Oh,
However,
yeah.
I could not stand it. I hated it so much that he held that Emmy upside down like that. I just thought that that looked awful. And I was just like, what are you doing, man? It just kind of showed a disregard for the award he was just handed. I hated that he did that. I don't know why. It's just that kind of was just like, what's next? Someone gonna win an Oscar, hold the Oscar upside down?
Well, it was almost like he was drunk.
Yeah, for a minute I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad he won." But then, then he was speaking, I was like, "Dude, why are you holding that trophy like that? That's not a good look. I'm sorry."
Well, on the bright side, I was at least glad he won because that was definitely one of my favorite wins of the night. I really loved his performance on Blackbird, and glad he still managed to hold that buzz despite the show airing a year prior to final voting, as well as the fact that it missed miniseries.
Yeah, and I think that final episode sealed the win for him.
In fact, I should also take this moment to mention that the award for Outstanding Live Variety Special, which was presented on the main telecast this year, not the Creative Arts Awards, it went to Elton John's concert film titled Elton John Farewell from Dodger Stadium. Thus, he is now the 19th individual in history to have achieved competitive EGOT status.
I don't understand why he wasn't there. Like, that's such a monumental moment. And it was just like, I mean, his husband was there. I was just so surprised. I was like, Elton, where are you? Like, this is like, you just became an EGOT winner.
I might need to rewatch the speech again. I don't remember if they mentioned as to why he can make it or what.
I'm gonna have to look that up myself.
Well, yeah, no, what was also interesting is that shortly after that, Outstanding Lead Actor in a Limited Series was presented where, what do you know, Taron Egerton, who played Elton in Rocketman, wasn't there either. I always thought it would have been kind of funny if he ended up winning his category to following Elton.
That would have been something, but given how Blackbird underperformed the way it did, it just seemed very unlikely that they were going to give Blackbird both of its main actors.
So that just about does it for our recap of this year's Emmys. No details have been revealed for the next ceremony yet, but there's already going to be several buzzy titles eligible, such as the final season of The Crown, the long-awaited second season of Feud, the return of Hacks, and Kate Winslet's third HBO miniseries. So thanks for joining me to recap this year's Emmys, Jack.
Thank you. It's always a fun time doing it.
For those who'd like to keep up with your work, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, you can find me on my Facebook and Instagram page, just under Jack Mahanes. You can also find for my articles that I've had published on Gold Derby, it's just under my name, Jack Mahanes. I have 5 articles published, one on the Emmys, 4 on the Oscars. And you can also find me on quite a few YouTube appearances on Gold Derby, because I've taken part in some Gold Derby segments this past year.